You're head of this foundation, you're running this event. There are about 400 people here today. Kind of a broad mix in geography, some broad mix in terms of ideology, in terms of race. The keynote speaker, Condi Rice. Some might say, well, what in the heck does Condi Rice, who's a former Secretary of State, she was provost of the University at Stanford, most of her life in diplomacy, academic, or practical aspects. What in the world does she know, and does she have to do with some foundation that's promoting school choice?
Good question. Well, the secretary knows a great deal, first of all, about education. She has spent her life in education. In addition, she knows a great deal about national security. She, earlier this year, published a report under the Council on Foreign Relations auspices called U.S. Education Reform and National Security. It basically has become a national security issue. The fact that only 30% of our and people trying to get into the military can pass a basic skills test. The fact that our K through 12 system is doing such a poor job in generating human capital that we're at a competitive disadvantage with other countries. In addition, many of us, and I know Milton Friedman did, really saw school choice as a civil rights issue. And it's really the civil rights issue of the 21st century. And I think Condi Rice knows something about civil rights and upward mobility as well.
Well, look, the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964. We all know about that, the Civil Rights Act of 64. It basically said no discrimination in employment, certainly in accommodations. This country has embarked on freedom for everybody, no discrimination based on race or creed. Separate but equal was abolished in Brown v. Board of Education, 1954. And it's kind of an interesting date. Brown v. Board of Education, 1954. Supreme Court abolishes separate but equal. And I think Friedman wrote his seminal article on school choice and vouchers in 1955. Is that right?
Correct. You do your good research.
And in 1962, he wrote Capitalism and Freedom, reiterating his belief in school vouchers. And we're celebrating 50th anniversary of that, kind of at the same time his 100th birthday, 50th anniversary of the University of Chicago publishing Capitalism and Freedom. And of course, Milton Friedman taught most of his real academic career was at the University of Chicago. He spent a lot of time at Stanford after, but when he was younger in publishing. So those are the 54 separate but equal. Didn't that do it? I mean, isn't that enough to give low-income minorities the same opportunity for education that everybody else has?
No, I think that what we have now is just a new form of separate but equal. Based on your zip code, you are allocated, you are assigned to a government school, and if you're in a poor neighborhood or certain zip codes, your life prospects are wiped out. They're just wiped out. So it's a new disguised form of separate but equal, the current government education system.
So you mean in the public school system, which everybody says, I believe, not everybody, I should say, a lot of people know I do a TV show. We've 700 guests, most of them politicians. They often come on and say, oh, I believe in public schools. It's kind of like I say, somebody believes in God or there's a certain religion, but that's what they say. They believe in public schools, okay? And you're saying public schools, it's a monopoly. So the zip code, Winnetka, is Illinois, people would know that, North Shore, ritzy neighborhood, 693. If you happen to be born into a family that's in 693 zip code, you're going to be going to a great school, New Trier High School, okay?
Right.
Or Glencoe, where Leo Malamud's from. He was the host, I guess, of the event this evening. Great mind, great experience with the financial markets here in Chicago. He lives in Glencoe, 622. Well, Barack Obama, you know, his kids, I can't remember the zip code, but he was in Hyde Park. I don't know the zip code there. I think it might be 645. But his kids went to the lab school, private school. Now, he told me it was because they got a good break because he was teaching there, his wife was working there, so they didn't have to go to Ray Street, which was not quite as good as the lab school in Hyde Park. So we're getting the sense all around the country, if you're born in a wealthy area with a nice zip code, you're going to probably go to a good school. It's not like there's a perfect correlation of money and quality, but The two are correlated, right?
Actually, the two are not really correlated. And it isn't the case that it is not the case that if you're in a so-called good zip code, you're going to go to a good school. In fact,
Is that right? There
one
are
of the
good
problems
zip codes where there's a bad school?
One of the problems going on in this country is that people in nice middle-class neighborhoods think their schools are good, and they're terrible, and they're on an international standard. They're terrible. This is happening in California. People are discovering that even in ritzy areas, their schools are not good. However, what is even more certain is if you are in an undesirable zip code of various socioeconomically, whatever, it's the chances that you're going to be in a bad school go way up. So it doesn't guarantee anything to be in an affluent zip code, but if you're in a bad zip code, you're more than likely going to be in a bad school.
Are you saying that a good zip code is sort of a necessary but not sufficient condition for a good school?
Well,
You can manage to turn, look, even the public schools can turn even a lot of money spent per kid into not such good results. Is that what you're telling me?
it is. I wouldn't even say it's a necessary. There are very good schools in all kinds of areas of the country. But they're more the exception than the rule. If you're going to school in East LA, a high school where people go in, have to walk in through metal detectors, and your chances of being mugged are higher than they are of being graduating on time. So if you're in a high school like that, you are your life prospects are limited. And it isn't really just about affluent neighborhoods and not affluent neighborhoods. Really across the board, there are isolated examples of good schools, good principals, and some of them in lower income areas, some higher. But in general, the American school system is a disaster. We're now at the bottom of the industrialized world in our results, and something has to change.
Well, we heard something tonight, and I mean, you know the quote better than I. It might have been from Milton Friedman, maybe for somebody else. School choice really helps in low-income areas, and it helps probably somewhat in middle-income areas, and hardly at all in wealthy areas. Did I get that right? Who said it, and what's that about?
Quite close. He said he wasn't speaking of areas, he was speaking of people. He said it would help poor people the most, middle income somewhat, rich people the least. Because rich people already, if they want to send their kids to private school, they can. It would help poor people.
They have the choice of going to a private school. That's good. Middle income people can move to a neighborhood that has a better school because they're a little bit more mobile. Mm-hmm. The low income parents, they can't move. They're tied to the job. The opportunities aren't so flexible. So that's your point.
Yes.
So they're sort of facing a monopoly from the local public school, a poor family. But if you had school choice, if in Chicago, for instance, you mentioned the word backpack. I say it's interesting because our regular viewers would know kind of the symbol of this show is the backpack.
Oh, really?
My daughter made for me, I have this big UCLA backpack. And what I've done initially is I'd say in Chicago about 10 years ago, when Barack Obama was first on the show, Public Affairs in 2000, I'm not sure, but I think we were spending $6,000 to $7,000 per year. If you took the total budget in Chicago for the Chicago Public Schools, divide it by the number of students, you were getting maybe, it was more like 8,000 or 9,000. They might say 6, 7, but because they don't count certain things.
Correct.
But it was 8,000, 9,000, and that was in 2000. Okay, that was and so I'd say to Barack, I'd say, look, if
so it's probably 14,000, 15,000 now.
It's exactly right, 15,000, because the budget's actually gone down a little bit this year. But a year or two ago, the budget for the Chicago Public Schools was $6 billion and about 400,000 students.
So $15,000.
400,000 into $6 billion, you're a good math student, 15,000 per kid per year. So I say to people, let's take the 15,000, put it in the backpack, strap the backpack on the kid in the Chicago Public Schools, and if the kid wants to stay with his parents, decides to stay in the public school, the backpack stays there, the cash stays there, the kid stays there, nothing changes. But if the parents want to go to a private school, parochial or otherwise, out goes the kid, out goes the backpack, out goes the cash. So my daughter took a small backpack and penciled in Public Affairs, and thanks, Karin. A little shout out to Karin here. So that's our trademark. The backpack. You said something about backpack when we were talking about choice. How do you use that phrase?
We use choice. Choice in education is really a spectrum. The first step along the spectrum is what's called backpack funding. Oakland, California does this. You go to any public school you want, or government school, as Milton had it, and your money goes with you as if it's in a backpack. Then the next step towards choice is charter school, and then the next step towards choice and the full step is vouchers. So really it's backpack funding, then charter, then voucher.
Well, what's the difference when you say the first step is backpack? Isn't that voucher? I'm not quite getting it. What's that first step?
The backpack
Sounds like a voucher to me.
It's a voucher, but you can only spend it at a public school, at a government school. You have to go to
that's an important point. That's no backpack.
Yeah.
That's no choice. That's like saying back in the 70s when we didn't allow foreign competition in the automobile business. You may remember we had high tariffs,
sure.
so we had American cars. And so if you said to American consumers, you can buy this American car or that American car or another American car, but you can't buy a Toyota, you can't buy a Honda. That's not choice. That's not competition, right?
It was, exactly.
So who would call that choice?
Henry Ford said that you can buy any Model T you want as long as it's black. Well, it is some choice, and that you're at least getting a choice among a restricted set.
But it's pretty bad
It's a
choice.
small choice.
Yeah.
That's why charters are better, but the best of all is vouchers. But charters is a good step.
So, inner cities, whether you're talking Chicago, you're talking Detroit, you're talking New York, the big inner cities that tend to have a disproportionate number of minorities, Hispanics and African Americans. That generally true? Philadelphia, Detroit, Chicago, New York, Denver. If you go inner city for those cities, disproportionately African American, disproportionately Hispanic. Would you say so?
Yes.
And disproportionately low income.
Yes.
Those are the areas where Milton would say vouchers can have the greatest impact, right?
That's where they would have the greatest impact. However,
look, Barack Obama was on the show. I asked Barack Obama in 2002, June 27, 2002, the year of the Zelman decision, okay, which said that vouchers are constitutional, at least from a First Amendment perspective.
Right.
Might be other issues. Well, Barack, what do you think about vouchers? He said, the conditions in the Chicago public schools are intolerable. And folks, this is on tape. We can document it if we have to. It's on videotape. They're intolerable. And that's what Barack said. And he said he would be for anything that would improve the quality of those schools in Chicago. And I said, you're telling me, you, Barack Obama, that time state senator, at that time a possible candidate for the U.S. Senate, turns out President of the United States, you might be for school vouchers. And you know what he said? He said, Jeff, everything's on the table.
Oh, good.
Now, does that sound like yes to you?
Yes.
Well, it's not quite a yes, but
okay.
It sounds like yes. Anyway, the point is he said that in 2002. A year later, I asked him the same question. Then he's a candidate for the U.S. Senate. Then he says, as you know, Jeff, I'm not for vouchers, I'm for charter schools, because he can't upset and I don't say it to denigrate Barack. If you want to get the Democratic Party primary nomination for the U.S. Senate, you can't be for vouchers.
Well,
I mean, won't you agree? You can't be for vouchers. But the point is, anyway, to cut this short.
No. I'm going to answer
I'm going to
that.
cut myself short. You go ahead then. If you want to answer, go ahead.
Yeah,
Can you be for vouchers if you want to get the
That's
nomination?
not the point. Somebody should say what they believe, and then the citizenry can decide, do I support him or not? If you're telling me that he believes one thing, frankly, the president did the same thing in 2008. He was up in Milwaukee in the campaign. He said, one day, we're going to do whatever works, and even if that includes vouchers, we're going to do whatever works. And then the next day, his campaign released a press release saying, well, when the candidate said yesterday, we're going to do whatever works, he didn't really mean
that
vouchers.
was version 2002 one day, and then it was version 2003 the next.
So I can't, I don't do politics. I'm talking about economics, policy. This is a better solution. I would also say that it's a strange issue politically in that you're correct. You do have affluent suburban Republicans are often against school choice because, as much as everybody understands that education in this country is in trouble, everybody thinks their local high school's good. You can't have it both ways. Not everyone can be taller than the average person in the room. Well, if you understand that the school system's in trouble, then you shouldn't just assume yours is good. However, on the pro-voucher side, the African American and the Hispanic community is about 70% in favor of vouchers. It's a strange issue that puts together part of the Republican Party with part of the Democratic Party, the minority wing of the Democratic Party, and the people against it tend to be union Democrats and to some extent affluent suburban Republicans.
Well, are you telling me, thinking ahead about the presidential election of 2012, Barack Obama's position is clear. He's for charter schools. He's opposed to vouchers. He and Arne Duncan abolished school vouchers, a school voucher program for Washington, D.C.
However,
would that be fair to say?
Be fair, except it survived. Everybody, I thought it was abolished too. It looked like it was dead, and then the House at the last minute saved it.
If you're Mitt Romney in those battleground states, and number one, do any of these have battleground states? Do they have some inner cities in them?
Well,
Let's think. Pennsylvania, is that a battleground
Yes.
state? Got Philadelphia,
Yep.
right?
And Pittsburgh.
Pittsburgh, okay. North Carolina is a battleground state. It doesn't have an inner city, but it has areas that are rather large in population and have large minority populations, right?
And there's a great many, I'd say the church, the Baptist Church, Southern African American
Ohio.
preachers.
Ohio's got Columbus,
Cleveland,
Cincinnati,
yeah.
Cleveland.
Which already has a voucher
So
program.
Romney, if you're advising Romney, okay, Mitt, if you're listening, okay, you're listening to Patrick Byrne, who knows a lot about this, and he says, if you could mudge your vote up in Ohio, in those big cities, from a black vote that might be 10% to 20%, gives you a real edge. And you know what? It's also good public policy. So you're doing something you believe in. Because you told me, I don't know if it's right, you told me Mitt Romney believes in school voucher, school choice, right?
He has said so, and he has said that he would move part of the funding for the Department of Education into a voucher program. However, you're asking me to talk to what my political advice would be. I am the least political person in the world. I don't have the part of my brain that makes the calculations you're trying to get me to make in terms of how Mitt Romney should play out.
What you have here is experience with school vouchers and school choice. You've read about this more than I have. I knew a little bit about it when I knew Milton Friedman, okay? But you've been focusing, you know something in Milwaukee and how it's doing in Milwaukee. You know something about how vouchers did in Cleveland, right? Mm-hmm. And how it did in Washington, D.C. And so if you talk to these folks like Romney about this and said, you're not being partisan, you, Patrick, are not. You're trying to help the kids. And you believe school choice is the best way to help low-income people, right?
I do think it is the single most important thing we can do for the United States, especially poor people.
And so maybe Mitt Romney needs a nudge from people like you and others to hear about school vouchers, what they can do.
Listen, Jeff, I'm here to talk about vouchers, not to talk about the candidates. I don't get involved. I don't want to talk about Mitt Romney.
Well, okay, well then
Barack
put that
Obama.
aside now.
Okay.
Now tell me, try this one. You've been doing this, working with the foundation for 12 years.
I guess I've been involved. I think it's about 10 years I've been on the board.
Friedman wrote his article 57 years ago on vouchers.
Good math
right?
skills.
Okay. Track for me the success of school vouchers in that period.
Well, it really went nowhere until the 90s. In the 90s, it started, and we're gaining momentum in the last 2 years. It's like the Berlin Wall's coming down. There have been dozens of programs passed. I think about 17 states have passed it. In the last 2 years, we've had Indiana and Louisiana go statewide. New Hampshire just did something. Georgia and Oklahoma are doing special needs things. It is catching like wildfire. There's other states. Anyway, in the last 2 years,
those are looking at choice very broadly. If you were to look at what I'd call fully funded school voucher programs, where they did what we said hypothetically, take $15,000 in Chicago, we're spending it now, give parents the full amount of money.
Or
voucher,
even 90%.
Or even 90%. There aren't so many of those examples to point to, are there? Am I wrong on that? I don't want to be, complete
Louisiana
pessimist.
and Indiana, I would say, are the two ones that come close. They've come pretty close to that now, and their programs are growing quickly.
And is that your measure of success? If I said to you, what would be success for you 10 years down the road? Would it be X percent of cities having those kind of fully funded vouchers? Would that be one of your objectives?
Well, I look at it not as a percentage of city, but percentage of kids.
Okay.
And my objective would be every child in America has the right to defect from the government system with a voucher of of half the amount that the government is spending or more, and that would be success, is that everybody has the opportunity to. Now, if you want to stay in your local school, stay in your local school, but that everyone would have the choice.
Do you think kids would learn how to read better in substantial levels? That is, with this right now, we might say in Chicago, 30-40% of the kids read at grade level. That's been like that. Some maybe say it's gone up to 50% over the last 12 years. Lots of reform, lots of effort, not major changes. Do you think the kind of choice programs you're talking about could ratchet that up? So Chicago might be looking at 80% of kids, low-income areas, reading at grade level. Is that feasible, possible?
Absolutely and unambiguously. The data supports that children who take part in voucher programs do better. They close the gap, the achievement gap between African American and white children quickly. All kinds of there have been 10 published studies and academic peer-reviewed articles. 8 of them have proven to a 95% confidence level that vouchers work, and the other 2 proved it, but just to a 93% confidence level. So the data is at this point unambiguous.
And the public schools get better because they have to compete with the private schools. Is
Correct.
that right?
That's been documented. Yep. There's been a study that shows that in Florida, that as children start defecting from the government system, eventually the government schools start saying, pitching up their socks and saying, how do we get better? It's the only thing that drives them to get better. Not remonstrating with them, not protesting, not writing letters to the board of directors, board of education. Let children defect, and once you have some children with a choice, once you have kids taking that choice, the public school systems actually start improving.
Okay, so we're going to wrap this up soon, but I want to get some key points.
I think I've probably got time for maybe one long one lesson.
No,
sure.
let me do short ones.
Okay,
Let's do lightning round.
Okay.
3 or 4 minutes lightning round.
Great.
Quick thing. Milton Friedman. Essence of Milton Friedman.
Free to choose. That society is better off, the people are better off when they're allowed to make choices for themselves rather than commissars making choices for them.
Okay. Biggest impact of Milton Friedman, was it in education? Was it in monetary policy? Was it somewhere else? Biggest impact? The achievement of which he was most proud was his pivotal role in ending the draft in the United States. He was the intellectual force on in the movement and on what's called the Gates Commission that ended the draft. In addition, his work, of course, in monetary theory has become part of the intellectual toolkit of any economist. So one thing on the draft, it was there in his mind probably because it's a more efficient allocation of resources. If you allow people who want to do something to do it, you get the people with the best skills, but also his concept of a free society. Am I right on that?
It's both a consequentialist argument and the natural liberty argument that it's just inconsistent. He thought it was slavery. It was a form of slavery. We're going to temporarily enslave you for 6 years or 4 years and make you fight for your country. He saw that as inconsistent with a free society.
Now, the power of one, that's the motto of the foundation?
No, that was just the slogan for tonight.
I've heard it before, though, haven't I? I mean, is it something you've used from time to time?
No, I think of that as the slogan of tonight.
What does that mean, power of one?
Well, it was referring to Milton Friedman and how this one intellectual dynamo really changed the course of the 20th century. I actually would have argued that it should have been titled tonight The Power of Two, because Milton and Rose Friedman were a team or partners, and those who knew them know that maybe Milton may have been the junior partner in that relationship. At least Rose was not the junior partner. She was a powerhouse herself.
From a former student of economics at the University of Chicago when there was a Chicago School of Thought, I don't know if there is, but back in the 60s and 70s there was a school of thought. I thought the power of one meant, you start with these models of competition and monopoly. We start with the individual in economics, and we aggregate from there. So when you get a market, you're talking about aggregating individuals. But every individual has that power. Every individual, if they walk away from a product, has some effect on that product either getting better or they go out of business. So the individual makes the decision. That's what I thought the power of one, not so much Milton Friedman, but Friedman stood for that. Friedman stood for what I just said, and more than any person I know on this earth. He was the most influential economist, in my view, of the 20th century because he took that very simple idea. You could take it back to Adam Smith, but for the 20th century, Friedman pushed that idea wherever he could. Agree?
Well, I would say you're correct. That's a double entendre because, of course, Milton's whole philosophy is about the power and the significance of the individual, and in that sense, the power of one. But tonight was also meant to be an expression of the power of one man's vision, one man's ideas, Milton Friedman's, and how the enormous impact they had on the world. But you're right, it's a double entendre because it's at the core of Milton's philosophy that it's the individual and his or her choices and preferences that matter, not the commissars.
And we started with Condi Rice. We're going to end with Condi Rice. She was the keynote speaker today.
Yes.
Milton Friedman, Jewish, East Coast, intellectual, focus on economics. Condi Rice coming from Birmingham, Alabama, low-income parents, African American, focus on diplomacy. What is it is there a bond between Condi Rice and Milton Friedman? And if so, what is it?
Well, there are numerous bonds. They were friends. They, besides just at a personal level, they were friends. They were both at the Hoover Institute at Stanford University, which is just a fantastic. Both Hoover and Stanford are fantastic intellectual environments. But I think there were deeper bonds. I think that ultimately Milton Friedman and Milton Rose Friedman were about opposing tyranny, and Condi Rice opposing tyranny. And Condi Rice, whom I adore and respect tremendously, you got it. One consistent theme to her adult life has been opposing tyranny. She was a Sovietologist at Stanford. She was a professor of Soviet studies back when there was a Soviet Union. She was in arms control. She came to the attention of people in Washington and got whisked into this fantastic life away from academia and becoming a National Security Council member and National Security Advisor and then Secretary of State. And the theme of her work was in a Secretary of State was transformative diplomacy, which is about opposing tyranny. So at a deep philosophical level, they're really two peas in a pod.
And we'll grapple with that because you hit it when you said transformative. Barack Obama said he wanted to be a transformative president. Condi Rice today talked about education as being transformative. It certainly transformed her life. It allowed her to have impact in all of those areas you've just described. If she could persuade Barack Obama, again, I know you don't want to get into the politics, but if she, Mitt Romney, anybody could persuade Barack Obama, if there were a common theme coming out of this election, if jointly Romney and Obama talked about school choice, okay, could you be happier? If they both ended up favoring school choice, could you be happier?
No, that would be fantastic. That would be a dream. That would be a dream. I think that the political dynamics you alluded to earlier seem to handcuff our president in some ways from supporting a policy that I think publicly supporting a policy he actually believes in. I mean, his own life was, he went to schools on scholarships of various kinds. His children are in private school. He went to Occidental, to Columbia, to Harvard. I don't know how much of that was scholarship or not, but clearly he had
a lot of it was scholarship.
And he went to a very nice private school in Hawaii.
On scholarship.
So I don't know.
School.
I don't know how, but he certainly had those opportunities. His children do, and so far he is denying it to students today. So I would love nothing more than for him to. I don't think it's a question of him seeing the light. I think he already sees that this is the right thing. And from the comments you quoted and I've quoted, I think he understands this is the right thing to do. It's just a matter of, is he going to worry about his political base, or is he going to be the president he told us he would be?
Patrick Byrne, Chairman of the Board, Freedom Foundation for Educational School Choice. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us.
It's my honor, Jeff. Thank you very much.